Welcome to another episode of fabitgarage. This is going to be episode 1 of the Budget V8 Miata. And the first episode of the series, we're going to work on the subframe, the rear subframe. We're going to get ready to clean up the subframe and weld the 2 mounts for the 8.8. Subframe is in decent shape, so it gives us a good starting point. I'm going to show you here the diff. I have the surfaces all cleaned up, brake cleaned and dried. You really want as little as oil residue as possible when you're doing RTV. Then that's going to guarantee that it's going to seal really good. Nice and clean inside, ready to go. I have the bolts here, which I ran them on the wire wheel, nice and clean. I like to take a piece of cardboard and poke holes in it and then drop the bolts in so I can hold it from underneath, and I can basically just throw a coat of paint on them. Because this was bare metal, I used self-etching primer as a first coat, which creates a nice reaction because of the acid in it, and it really bonds to bare metal. And then for the second coat, I did Rust-Oleum gunmetal, just to, you know, slow down the rust a little bit. It's not gonna rust-proof it forever, but it'll definitely keep it like that for a decent amount of time. Brand new bolt on the back with Loctite. I still have to do the seals, but I'm gonna do that once this is all closed up. So make sure I don't damage them because I'm gonna be moving in and out, in and out. So for today's project, we're gonna clean that up, take the paint off where we're gonna need to weld. We're gonna use a torch to remove moisture from the metal before we weld, which is a really good idea. And I'll show you what I mean by that. And yeah, so I'm gonna start grinding this off, doing my measurements, and I'll give you guys an update as I go along so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Another thing I forgot to mention, every time you remove bolts and you plan on reusing them, I usually like to clean them off nice and clean on the wire wheel, and I like to run a tap on all of the threads just to make sure, see how nice and clean they are. That way the bolt will go in nice and easy, and 2 years from now, if you have to take it off again, it'll come right off. It's a good idea to run a tap on every thread that you have it off already. It will add very little time, and it'll save you a lot of time in the future. So it's a pretty good idea to do that. All right, guys, so I got the plate or the mount for the front of the diff roughly in place. Monster Miata recommends that you go from center of this hole to the edge of the plate to be 4 inches, and this is exactly where it is. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a Sharpie silver, and I'm gonna basically outline everywhere that the plate outlines, and that will give me exactly where I have to grind to bare metal to be able to weld this in. I'm gonna do this all around, and then I'm gonna grind all the paint off, so that way this will be sitting in place again in the same spot, and I'll be able to tack weld it, remeasure before I actually fully weld it. So I'll get back in a little bit as soon as we're done with that. All right, as you can see, I have marked everywhere I need to grind. I moved the 8.8 out of there because obviously you don't want metal shavings going inside of the diff, so I moved it across the shop. I marked the inside and out. Now I'm gonna grind all the paint off. I'm just gonna use one of those, I believe this is 2-inch little discs. That's awesome. And then I'm gonna show you what I would do before I weld. Stay tuned. Okay, so I ground everything down to bare metal, nice and clean. Tack welded the front differential mount in place, as you can see, on both sides. I'm gonna leave it like this because I wanna be able to do the other mount on the other side and then put the differential on it and make sure all the bolts and everything lines up and this is straight before you weld it all up, and then you find out that you have to cut all the welds and redo it. This way it'll be nice and easy if I do have to move it, but I'm pretty confident that this is dead on. I'm gonna show you something pretty cool that if you're starting to weld, or you could be welding for a while already and you don't know about this, but metal tends to hold on to moisture. And by looking at this, you would think, oh, that's just dusty metal. There's no moisture in there, right? So let me show you something cool. Take one of these torches, or any torch really. Look what happens when you heat it up. this is all moisture in the metal. So it's always a good idea to, anything you're welding, you bring it down to bare metal, and right after you clean the area and it's nice down to bare metal, you run the torch, and the torch is going to get rid of every little bit of moisture that's in the metal. And not only that, it's going to preheat the metal just a little bit, so you can, when you weld, it's going to be a perfect weld and it's going to hold up good. You can get an okay looking weld if you don't do this, but this is to guarantee, you don't want moisture when you're welding. That's the #1 thing. So it's just a little trick. Anything before I weld. So I ran the torch all around here and I tack welded it. Obviously, when I go to weld the whole thing, I'm gonna do it again, because you leave this here for a few hours, you come back, you do the torch, you're still gonna get a little more moisture. That's just how it is. So I'm pretty much done with this side. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side, and then I'm gonna close up the differential, which is right now it's open. I have the bolts for the cover drying because I threw a coat of paint on them. Once I close that up, put the cover back on with RTV, then I'm gonna be able to drop the differential on here, the 8.8, and then we can see if it's a good fit. If it fits good, then we can go ahead and complete all the weld all across, and pretty much the subframe will be done welding wise. And then I just gotta clean it up and throw a nice coat of gloss black. I'm thinking I'm gonna do, and then we can move on to disassembling the car, taking all the extra stuff on the engine bay off so we can do our cutting and grinding there. So stay tuned for another update on the subframe. Okay, now on to the other side. You want to flip the subframe over. You want to find these 2 little holes here, and then you want to take your tape measure and you're going to find center. I mark my center here. After you find your center, measure from here to the hole, from here to the hole. Make sure these 2 measurements are exactly the same. And when you get your mount, Monster Miata already puts a center line here, which I did double check, and it is centered. So you're basically gonna line up that little notch with your mark. Do the same thing you did on the other side. You're gonna grind your paint. You're gonna run the torch if you want. I do, because I don't want moisture in my welds. Tack welded in, and once you have both pieces tack welded in, that's when you wanna put your bushings into the differential, and you wanna drop it in and make sure everything is lining up. Everything lines up, just weld it all up, and the subframe should be all set. Stay tuned for the next update. Here's the rear differential mount. Same thing as the other side. Clean the metal off, run the torch to get rid of all the moisture, tack weld. And here's the little mark that I made before. Not the 3 lines, the single line that's on the actual paint, lined up with the notch, dead center. So now I can put the diff in here and test fit it. On the rear, I'm not gonna be using the Ford diff mount. I'm actually gonna fabricate my own with poly bushings, and I'll make videos of that as I go too. But the mounts are pretty much all set. I just gotta do a test fit. Okay, so both mounts are tacked in. As you can see here, front and back. These are just bushings I'm gonna fab up. So as you can see, the front lines up perfect. I do have the subframe leveled, so from here to here, from here to here, it's level both ways. So now I gotta either buy the 8.8 mount, the factory mount, which I'm not really leaning towards because it's just regular rubber. I would like to do poly all around. So I might just fabricate the rear mount using poly bushings, which I had extra. I bought these from my Toyota Tundra and I never used, I sold the truck. So since this is just sitting on the shelf, I think I can use these 2 smaller bushings and I can fabricate a mount for here. Ideally, well, let me put this here for you. So right now, that's sitting at 87.3. Obviously, you want that at 90. So It's because the weight, it's pointing down. Once I lift this up and I fabricate a mount, that should be 90. The subframe is leveled, so that should be perfect. So the next update is gonna be fabricating a mount for the rear. But as you can see, the cover's back on. I torqued all the bolts to the torque specs. Silicone's still drying. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of fluid in it just to keep it from rusting or anything like that on the inside, but we're getting there. Once I fabricate the mount and everything lines up and the front is at 90, then I can remove the diff and weld both front and rear mounts all the way around. As you can see here, I just have it tacked. So we're making pretty good progress, I'd say. So stay tuned for the next video on where we're gonna fabricate this rear mount here. Also, if you want to know the part number for the front ones, I have the box here. Energy suspension. Here's the part number. So that's what goes on the front. Most people, when they don't want to use the Ford mount and they want to fabricate their own for the rear, they'll actually use the same bushings front and rear. I'm just using these. Well, I'm going to attempt to use these just because I already have it. There's no point of buying if I already have some that I know I'll never use. So I'm going to try these here and see how that goes, but I should be all right. So yeah, just stay tuned for the next update. It's gonna be building this mount here, and I'll try and show step by step how I make it, how I level the front to 90, and we should be pretty good. So appreciate you guys watching, and stay tuned. Thanks.